Hi everyone, welcome to this session on vocalizing gender-based statistics using spatial insights. My name is Nombuyiselo Murage and I'm the research and development lead from Women in GIS Kenya. So for this particular session, I want to do a deep dive on spatial variation in the prevalence of sexual and gender-based violence in Kenya. And I'll be talking about how that particular project extended to a gender dimension on COVID impacts and the gender situation room. I hope the key takeaway is from this session that you'll gain is on the novel use of spatial analysis for gender issues and gender equality in STEM, and the importance of inclusivity in tackling vulnerable group issues. And as we all know, location intelligence is important in decision making. So we want to ask ourselves, before we get started, we should ask ourselves, who is Women in GIS? Plot twist, we are not all women. But we are a consortium of advocates from academia, industry, government, university students, and various other stakeholders who are passionate about advancing the presence of women in the geospatial industry and by extension in the tech space, and also to tackle and vocalize vulnerable group issues such as women issues and issues that are not tackled in mainstream media. So we do this through four main key pillars, and this one can be done through, it started with our networking monthly meetup sessions where we were providing a platform for our community members to be able to engage in industry. And very quickly we got a feedback that a lot of people wanted to learn to find a way to collaborate and learn and skill up on their skills that they have, and that extended to our knowledge transfer sessions that we are calling the after hour series. And from there, we were saying that we claim to impart these particular skill sets and knowledge to our community. So how are we able to assess that our community is actually taking up the tools and skills that they are learning? So that extended to our database challenge. And the database challenge has been the most impactful, resourceful, particular pillar of our community initiative, because we've been getting brilliant crowdsourced insights from our community that some of which we've extended to, that we've expanded to extended projects, and that will be the basis of our discussion today. One of our projects that extended from our database challenge. So very quickly, before we highlight the particular discussion point that we'll be talking about today, I would like to talk about our this year's first quarter database challenge, which was on cervical cancer awareness. And we got so many insights. This particular challenge pulled together about 66 members from Ministry of Health. We had the Kenya Cancer Awareness Association. We had doctors learning about spatial modeling. And as you see on the screen, there's insights from some of our participants. This is just but a few. And some of the key insights that we learned was on health practitioner distribution. We learned about the various screening options there in cervical cancer and why there's such a low uptake in pap smear as a screening option because of the myths associated with it and the particular notions associated with pap smear. And we also learned that cost really plays a significant role in the kind of screening option that is attributed or recommended to women, because like HPV screening is an expensive treatment, and the reagents and the reagents and the particular techniques that are used for HPV screening are donor supported. So by the time you're being recommended for HPV screening, it's usually used as a confirmatory test. So like you can see on the screen, one of our participants, Moses, was able to realize that there's a high positive outcome correlation between HPV screening and the likelihood that you already have cervical cancer, because it is being used as a confirmatory test because it's only available in higher health clinics, and it's a bit expensive. So If you want to know more about that, please visit our website and our Medium page. We extended so much on that project. So now, before we we can get into the particular discussion for today. So a bit of background for all of us so that we can be able to ground ourselves on the discussion that we're having. I want to highlight on what gender-based violence is. So gender-based violence is an umbrella term that is used to refer to the harmful acts that are perpetrated against a person based on their socially ascribed differences, their gender. And the extent and nature of GVB cases varies across cultures, religions, and countries. So GVB can manifest itself as sexual exploitation in terms of transactional sex, forced prostitution. It can manifest itself as forced or early marriages or wife inheritance or female genital mutilation. So why am I saying this? As women in GIS, we realize that there's an inherent and intrinsic aspect of spatial and a distribution of how GVB manifests itself. So we said to ourselves, when we're talking about gender-based statistics, we cannot dissociate the aspect of location from the analysis and the narrative that we are forming on gender-based statistics, because how the treatments and the occurrences of GVB across the nation occur differently and should be responded differently, and the resolution treatments should be responded differently according to the location, the location this particular GVB case occurs, because there are certain contextual factors in particular regions that contribute to how GVB is different across different regions. Another thing I want to talk about is on that the particular motivation for this project is based on SDG 5, and more specifically the indicator 5.2, which looks at eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls in the private sector. So now that we have that, we can talk about the particular case in Kenya. So for this study on the spatial variation of sexual and gender-based violence in Kenya, prevalence in Kenya, looked at a data set, was based on the data set from the Kenya Demographic Health Survey for 2008 and 2014. And this particular data set had a high had a bigger sample set. And I know it's a bit of an older data set, but one of the reasons we picked it was because of the high sample set, and also that it was household surveys whose questions were designed to specifically cater for or understand sexual and gender-based violence in Kenya. And then, as you see on the particular map, you can see at the time of collection, that's the last 6 months in 2019, the occurrence of SGBV cases was presenting itself across the country, that there were 2 cases being reported by the county within 72 hours to as high as 1,500 cases, which you can definitely see the importance of this particular study. As well, I would like to highlight on the particular policy target for Kenya. The Kenya National Policy on Prevention and Response to GVB aims to reduce the cumulative occurrence of sexual-based violence by 35 to 45%, which is a reasonable target, because when you look at the global metrics, we need to have reasonable targets how we can reduce it year on year. So the data set was a point data set, like I mentioned, and it covered the period of 2008 and 2014. And as you can see there on the screen, it's divided based on sexual violence prevalence and physical violence prevalence. So in the particular in this study, we used geo-based model-based geostatistics to create a high-resolution prevalence map of GVB cases in Kenya. And the study made use of an R package known as the PrevMap package that has been used for epidemiological prevalence mapping studies in health statistics, and it was developed by the University of Lancaster. So this study, the aim of this was to create a to use spatial interpolation to create a surface map of the occurrences of the prevalence of GVB cases in the country. It would also allow us to identify hotspots where there's a high occurrence of GVB cases, as well as to unmask hidden trends in terms of how these particular cases occur across the region in the country. So the first thing that we did when we're looking at this study was to first understand, in terms of the actual variable itself, we ran spatial autocorrelation, and we're able to understand that the occurrence of GVB cases, they happen to be more similar, in particular when they're closer together geographically, as opposed to when they're far apart. So the GVB cases are more similar, like within a particular region, like Nairobi, which is the capital city, as compared to GVB cases that occur far away, such as Turkana, which is on the northeastern side of the country. Then the next thing, when they were able to determine that the actual outcome variable is correlated. The next thing we wanted to do was to look at the explanatory variables that can help us understand the prevalence or the occurrence of GVB cases across the country as it's distributed geographically. And cited from literature and various other studies, we looked at these particular indicators that have also been cited by various other studies. So we looked at paternal health indicators. We looked at drug and alcohol abuse, poverty index. We looked at cultural beliefs and upbringing, and so forth. So the study used the Pearson correlation matrix to understand how these particular variables relate to the main independent variable, which is gender prevalence, the sexual violence and gender-based prevalence. And we're able to see that most of these variables are actually correlated to the outcome variable. And further to that, we're able to understand using, I think this was on random forest classifier, we're able to understand the feature importance of each of the explanatory variables. And we found out that actually paternal education plays the most significant role in terms of explaining the occurrences of GVB based on our data set. I know alcoholism and poverty index show like it's next to 0, but this was something that should have been corrected. We were to go with a lower index that actually shows the significance of poverty index and alcoholism. But yes, the most important thing is that we realized that paternal education plays the most important role in explaining the occurrences of GVB cases across the country. So the outcome was a surface interpolation map that explains the prevalence. Right now it's showing on sexual violence prevalence for 2008. There was also another one down for 2014, where the red indicates the highest incidences of sexual-based violence, and the green showing low incidence of sexual-based violence. Then on the right side, we're also seeing that we talked about one of our goals was understanding the performance metrics, using it as a performance metrics for understanding how the achievement of policy thresholds. So you can see here on the right that you can see that the areas that are showing red are areas that are performing poorly. They are not achieving the 30% threshold of reducing the incidences of sexual-based violence in the region, whereas the green areas and yellow indicate that these areas have reduced on the previous annual cumulative of sexual prevalence by 30% or even performed better. So at this point, before I move on further, I really want to give credit to Caroline Okoth, who played an integral role in conducting this part of the study, including also Peter Masharia from Kemri Wellcome Trust, as well as Masi Manike from University of JKUAT. So the next thing I want to go is to explain how we extended this particular insights into another project that we are part of. So it's 2020, guys. It's the year of COVID, and we have all seen the impact of COVID in terms of how it has deepened in pre-existing inequalities and how it has exposed vulnerabilities in our social, economic, political fabric. So as women in GIS, we were welcomed to be part of a coalition of various other stakeholders to create a response, recovery, and resilience strategy for COVID. And particularly women in GIS, we were tasked with looking at the gendered dimension of the impacts of COVID. So yeah, I've talked about the vulnerabilities. So when we proposed our analysis to the stakeholders to support the State Department of Gender, the biggest thing that was highlighted to the State Department of Department of Gender highlighted was their vulnerability in terms of data collection. That's the main pain point that the State Department of Gender had in terms of understanding, monitoring, gender-based violence, and then thereafter creating a response resilience strategy for it. So Women in GIS, we developed a decision support dashboard that looks at gender statistics that is disaggregated by age, by gender, by type of abuser, by type of abuse, by resolution action. And then most importantly, it looked at developing a system for unique identifiers that relate to each particular case. So like I mentioned before, when I was talking about the previous study that was led by Caroline, is that this particular dashboard resolves at looking at the central pain point that is that it comes to gender statistics. Is a lot of data is siloed, and there's no way. Sometimes data goes only as far as reporting, and then sometimes it goes far as response, and it's disjointed and it's siloed. And the State Department of Gender wanted to look as a cohesive data pipeline that they can be able to monitor particular GVB case from end to end, from reporting to monitoring to response and resilience as a response resilience strategy. So to do that, we came up with a solution architecture that we are calling the gender situation room, or the gender hub. And basically what this is a data observatory, a collection of cataloged, curated gender statistics that can be able to inform the State Department of Gender and various other stakeholders to get a holistic and comprehensive view of all gender-based statistics in the country. And it also, the value add of this particular architecture is that it creates a module or guidelines on how data can be ingested from various other stakeholders to enrich the data set that we already have. And it also can collect reported cases from the national hotline for GVB cases, which is the 1195. It can aggregate data from hospitals. It can aggregate data from whether it's reported to the magistrates or it's reported to the chiefs, which is the lower administrative units in the country, or whether it's reported to the police. So it creates this almost like this pipeline that allows us to create an observatory and a collection of gender-based statistics that can be used by researchers, be used by the government, be used by NGOs, and these particular organizations of stakeholders can then also enrich it further, because within it we build a guideline on how they can be able to ingest their own particular data sets. So this is an active project that is currently going on, and it's modeled around GBB data, but it can be extended to all other dimensions of gender-based statistics. And like I mentioned, it is supported by various stakeholders. Principally, we are around to support the State Department for Gender, and there are also various other stakeholders who are supporting this initiative, including Global Partnership for Sustainable Development, UNFPA, Thunderbird, Women in GIS, Strathmore, amongst others. this work would not be possible with the team that you see here. I would really like to highlight the core team of women in GIS. They've been instrumental in mobilizing our community, mobilizing the data sets, mobilizing our database challenges, mobilizing industry stakeholders to engage with us and to engage with our community. So I wanted to take a minute to highlight the faces and the men, like I mentioned, behind women in GIS who are supporting the advancement of women issues in the geospatial space in East Africa. So that concludes my session. That concludes the talk. I welcome questions, responses, feedback. So let's get started on the questions.
Hi, Nombuyiselo. Thank you so much for walking us through your projects. We've got some really great feedback on the chat, so clearly people have found it very interesting. We have a question here from Natalie Weiss, and she asks, what is the source of the reported cases? Did you perform any sensitivity analyses to account for possible underreporting of GBV cases?
Okay, so thank you, Natalie, for your question. So I'm going to tackle that in two parts. One thing that I mentioned in my presentation was that the data sets in Kenya is very varied and very isolated. I think I mentioned very early on that gender-based violence has different dimensions to it. You can, from about 11 to 14 recognized dimensions, from child marriages to wife inheritance to rape cases to female genital mutilation. So in terms of doing sensitivity analysis for that, it can be a bit difficult, but for the most part, there are a lot of organizations that collaborate with the State Department of Gender and Crew, which is the main source of our data set that we had access to. But there's also data from the national hotline that was set up about 4 years ago, that's called the 1195. We also have various organizations that look at different aspects of gender dimension based on different dimensions. Like from a social perspective, you'd look at the value chain and engagement of women along an agricultural value chain, which is the biggest economic activity generator for Kenyans. And another thing that I can mention is that reporting is done at hospital level, at the civil level, where people might report at the magistrate or civilian courts, or they can also report at the administrative level, which is like I don't know what's the equivalent here, but it would be like chiefs or county councils in the UK or something like that. And that essentially was the need for the data pipeline, the gender hub, because all these different dimensions you would look at response or monitoring only up to reporting, and then it gets lost in the judicial system, or it gets lost in the health records, or it's reported on the hotline and there's no activity or there's no response afterwards. So that is the whole essence of the gender data hub, the gender room, to create a pipeline and a guideline for ingesting all this different data, which looks at all the different dimensions of GBV.
Yeah, it's a very big challenge that you're taking on.
Yes.
Danielle Macharia has asked in the chat, well, first of all, he said it was a very interesting study. He noted that eastern parts of Kenya, which have a lower population density, are green with lower cases. Do you think this has affected the outcome of the surface, and how did you handle population density issues in the model?
Okay, so thank you so much, Macharia. So one of the things that I would like to mention is low reporting does not necessarily mean that there's no incident rate. In actual fact, one of the reasons why the surface interpolation is important, because you can see a lot of a lot of green, which looks like it's achievement of policy thresholds. Well, in fact, part of the reason that gender-based prevalence incidence is low there is because sometimes the perceptions people have on what gender-based violence is necessarily doesn't correlate with what we know officially, like there will be some women who expect to be beaten and do not consider that as gender-based violence, and therefore that's like low reporting in that area. Or there are communal treatments on, like, if a child is raped or a woman is raped, she would be married off to her aggressor to cover that shame. So I would not necessarily say that low reporting means that they have a high incident, that it's performing better, but it's just that we need a better way of monitoring and looking at the reporting there. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that question.
I think so, yes.
We can take one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more. Matteo Bom has asked, just a curiosity about the data sources, where does spatial data on variables like paternal education or alcoholism come from? Is it official statistics?
Oh, thank you for that question. I was waiting for that question. So I did mention that the data set we had was from the demographic health and information data set survey. And that particular data set, the design questions that were asked in that question were used as proxies for understanding cultural perceptions on gender-based violence, or they were also asking on education levels of parents of survivors of GBV violence. So when you in general, when we were talking about those particular variables, they were indicated with the location of reporting or the particular respondents where they live. So that's how we were able to operationalize these particular variables on poverty index, on cultural perceptions and norms along a locational distribution network. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. I think there are a few more questions then, Nombuyiselo, but because of timing, I'm gonna move on to the next chat. But you feel free to take up these conversations on the chat or to join the networking breaks. I'm sure there's lots of people that will be interested to know more. Thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on such an impactful, important project. It's really awesome to see Spatial being used in this way.
Yeah, I'd like to just say thank you. If you want to know more about collaborating with us, please visit our website at wigisk.co.ke. It'll be on the chat, and also you can follow us on Twitter.
Brilliant, awesome. We'll make sure you get those links shared in the chat.
Yes.
Thank you very much.